So our last section before we get to the Q&A part of today's workshop is on instruction, right? And Meg Hayes and Nikki Trofa, two of our instructional design coaches here at Garnet Valley, are going to talk to you about what is really key and really the foundation of why we have this workshop. And that's how we're using AI in our classroom to help our kids learn about it, use it, be more productive as students, but also learn how to use it responsibly and appropriately. And they're going to talk briefly about how they have already begun supporting our teachers, both at Garnet Valley and those who work with throughout the country as part of their work with Edvative. So Nikki and Meg.
Thanks, Sam. Good afternoon, everyone. One of the things that comes to mind when we start talking about AI is really just the imagery surrounding it. And in my mind, I kind of think about how everything is so bot centered. And I think AI can be super exciting. There are so many possibilities it will bring. I think it also can be worrisome for all of the changes that it might bring for teachers' practices. So one of the things that we want to point out about entering the AI era right from the beginning, it's the same thing that AJ and all of my colleagues have sort of said, is that as we reimagine what instruction will look like, yes, we're going to sort of use this powerful tool of artificial intelligence, but we do not want to dismiss the fact that learning is inherently human and social. And so it is not sort of this bot-centered learning versus human-centered learning. It's really the combination of both of them that is going to help us innovate what education will look like. And we're sort of in this sort of revolutionary period where everything is happening so fast. What we want people to see is that we can use these tools to really elevate, amplify the human part of what we do. I know that for years, teachers talk about how full their plates have been, particularly through COVID and all of the things that are just piled on to our plates. This might be able to eliminate some of the work that we are spending time doing, some of like the generating of examples, some of the idea generation alone might open up some of that time that we can really dedicate to the personalized learning experiences that we give our students. And, while it can do a whole lot, AI is amazing. What we also want to do is use that to complement how we can build the meaningful connections with our students, be able to really, partner with it to offer empathy, empathetic support, and really do the work that we need to do to create inclusive environments. Teachers are not replaceable. We want to sort of partner this AI with the human factors that make the future of education so powerful and exciting. On the next slide, I think the question here is what we've all been asking ourselves as things continue to sort of rapidly change and grow. This was asked by Matt Miller, one of the well-known leaders in the ed tech world. He is the author of Ditch That Textbook and runs that blog. And he's done some research on ChatGPT and the effects of AI. But I think what it hits on is the struggle that we're all feeling about, like, this is amazing, but what are the implications of our practice? And so many of those things have come up, from ethics all the way to, how can I use it and how can I use it fairly? So some of the things that we think would be a good starting point would be, first, to experiment with some of the AI tools and the platforms that are out there and really start brainstorming potential uses for you and your students. But also, at the same time as you're sort of thinking about what it could look like, know what your values are. So do you value collaboration? Do you value inquiry? Do you value some of those things that can't be replicated with the AI, and think about how those two can work together? Consider the practices that you have in your classroom and align those practices with the potential uses of AI, so you can start thinking about the shifts that you might need to make to AI-proof assignments or design experiences that can't be sort of answerable by AI. And obviously some of this was touched on with Sam and Christine and Mike, which is that just building those digital literacy skills for our students to make sure that they understand the limitations, the ethical considerations, and then the biases. But lastly, too, just thinking through, how do I teach tomorrow knowing this exists? I teach the human skills that AI cannot replicate, such as empathy and compassion and creativity, problem solving, collaboration, all of that. So our thinking is that really we want to partner those human skills with the AI skills to really design effective lessons and deliver them so that we can achieve the student outcomes that we're looking for. So on this slide where you kind of see what what AI can do for teachers, we know it can be a valuable asset for our teachers. Simply put, everybody shares the same goal of improving student outcomes. If you kind of look at this list, we can go all the way from a lesson plan generator. And of course, yes, we can design a whole lesson there, but it can't deliver the lesson. So it might just give us these, objectives or help us kind of formulate a streamlined plan, all the way down to like a data analyzer. And in our data-driven world, it might help us better understand some of the things that we're noticing in students' performance and help us provide better feedback, more clear feedback, action steps to support them. I think one of the benefits too in teachers partnering with AI is to really personalize student learning. And so the more we can partner with AI to do certain things, we can really create experiences for students that are much more personalized than we might have in the past. So even from an assessment writer to a resource modifier, I think we can generate the materials that we can obviously modify as necessary to support our students. So as you look at that list, before we move on to the next slide, I want you just to consider, are there ideas on this list that you might use for your classroom, given the content objectives or the student population that you teach? Is there an idea that maybe you hadn't considered before? In a couple of minutes, Nikki will share some specific examples, but just kind of thinking of AI as a partner for you to support your students. On the next slide, there's a list of ways that AI can be partnered with students. And obviously we can use it as a powerful tool, but we also need to, as we've said before, teach our students to be responsible users and use it effectively. The thing that I think AJ touched upon this before is that moving away from the compliance, we really want to empower students to be able to sort of take charge of their own learning. And think of the strength in a student going home and not understanding their homework. There's a safety net right there if they use some AI tools as a thinking partner or a tutor to support them for home learning or assignments that they've been working on. Or this idea of using AI tools to create checklists as an executive function coach, somebody who may struggle with timelines for projects or the ability to chunk things. AI may be able to break down checklists and kind of give kids a timeline that on their own helps them sort of manage their own learning. So I think that the benefits can, be seen far and wide if we can elevate students to use this responsibly. And I think giving them that autonomy and that agency is going to be really an important step moving forward. And finally, on this next slide, what we want to do as we're getting ready to sort of launch this, as we're getting ready to leverage AI in our classrooms, one of the things that we've come to understand is that actually putting in a really good prompt matters. Your input into any kind of artificial intelligence tool really impacts the output. And so one of the things that you would need to do when you're typing in a prompt, and this is something that teachers need to kind of play around with, but might need to teach students explicitly, is that in order to type a strong prompt, you need to identify a clear purpose. Like tell the bot who the audience is. Is it like if you're the teacher typing it in, I have a 10th grade biology class, and then already you're kind of telling that audience, I need a lab typed out. So it should be in a formal kind of scientific tone. And then the last part is maybe what is the tool? So knowing what your purpose is can help identify the tool. AJ shared a whole bunch of different tools beyond ChatGPT that might be used based on your purpose. So when you're crafting that prompt, also you kind of want to say, like, what is the goal? Like, I am designing a unit on, I am giving a lecture about, I want students to do, and the next part, instructions, list 5 something, write a paragraph of 6 to 8 sentences, generate 6 questions. So the more specific you can be, the better your response will be. The context also matters. So if you kind of peek at the bottom of this slide, something that I had seen that it seems to be a powerful kind of formula for putting in a prompt is act like A, and then write A, and then define your objective or your goal, and then define the ideal format, whether it's a letter, whether it's a list, whether it's a paragraph, whether it's something else. That seems to be a really strong formula to get exactly what you want. And then that last part, which I think has come up a few times, is just, even though you might put it in and think you're getting this amazing output, it needs to be checked. So not only do we want to look at the results for accuracy, especially if we're typing in, like, please do some sort of exemplar for this text. Sometimes we've seen facts that are incorrect. Think about how the bot is getting its facts. So check for accuracy. Then edit and revise it, paraphrase it. You may be able to save time using all of these, and students might be able to do this, but an important element is not to just take it from AI and use it. There's this whole element of making it your own, and paraphrasing it is a really important part, or that edit and revision process is a really important part to using these tools. So in terms of leveraging it, we have lots of ideas on how we might be able to implement AI in our lesson design and how we deliver it with students. So I'm going to turn it over to Nikki.
Thanks, Meg. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We're going to shift gears a little bit and think about how we can leverage AI in our classrooms, but also, as Meg mentioned, it's not replacing us as the teachers and that human component. We want to somehow marry utilizing AI and utilizing highly effective instructional strategies when we're using it. So we here in Garnet Valley and at Edvative Learning have developed a framework called Effectively Designed Instruction, where we categorized good teaching and instruction into 4 main themes, which you can see here. Over the next couple of weeks in our upcoming webinars, we're going to dive a little bit more deeply into each of these themes. But for now, we're just going to dip our toes a little bit into them and see how utilizing AI in 4 of these different ways to support our instruction and student achievement could look. So on the next slide, we're going to present to you the first of 4 different scenarios. Each of these instructional scenarios will have 3 components to them. And we're hoping that from these scenarios, it'll spark some inspiration for you and how you might consider using AI in your classroom this upcoming school year. So the first column here on the left-hand side, in each scenario, we present the background and the teacher goals of a lesson or assignment. So in this scenario, it reads, Mrs. Edwards' 4th grade students need to craft essays in response to a text they have read. So that's her goal. Mrs. Edwards knows working collaboratively with clear expectations can positively impact her students' learning outcomes. So really, her goal is she wants her 4th graders to write essays and work together in doing so. In that second column, we think about how Mrs. Edwards is going to use AI or ChatGPT in this instance to really help design her instruction. And so when we think about this, these are some of the things that Mrs. Edwards might type in to AI in order to support the design of that lesson. Some of those things might include writing an essay prompt based on a teaching point from her unit, generating a rubric to evaluate student essays, creating examples of essays that fall within each of the rubric descriptors, and identifying roles and lenses students may take to discuss, evaluate, and give feedback on essays. So we really want to think here about how she's using the AI tool to design her instruction. And then finally, that third column there is putting it into practice. We want you to think and put your student hats on here. After Mrs. Edwards uses the AI tool to support the lesson design, what does that lesson delivery actually look like for students in the classroom? So we see students working collaboratively to read, evaluate, and revise essay examples. Students take on different roles to contribute to discussions and revisions together within these essays. And students in her class can develop an understanding of what makes a good quality essay, which is the ultimate goal. So you can kind of see in just this first scenario, kind of the idea that the teacher creates or the objective of the lesson taken all the way to the students and what that process looks like. We're going to walk you through 3 more of these, all focused on different subject areas and grade levels so that you can get a sense of how this might work for you. So in our next instructional scenario, we have Mrs. T's 8th grade social studies students who need to become critical consumers of information. She understands that evaluating images and documents to spot dupes is an authentic learning experience and complex problem her students will face throughout their lives. In that second column there, here's what Mrs. T does. She uses AI to find and create those dupes for her. And then she uses AI to create a list of questions or criteria to evaluate the credibility of the source. You'll notice in this scenario, we didn't specify which AI tool Mrs. T is using. And we put a little tip down there at the bottom that there's really so many options out there. And we want to make sure that as educators, we're being intentional about which tools we're selecting to use instead of always just going to ChatGPT, if that's our go-to. We want to see what's out there and make sure that we're using the best tool that's going to support what we're looking for. Because there's many out there. I know PhotoMath was out there, Coursology was brought out there. There's a lot of different tools that serve different purposes. So we just want to make sure it meets the purpose we're looking for. After Mrs. T uses AI, then looking at that third column, how is it put into practice? The students are evaluating sources and partnerships in small groups through a 2-step process. So they would do a notice and note or possibly a forensic analysis. So these are just some different instructional options for students. A notice and note is a gallery walk type of station or station rotation. A forensic analysis would be a way, for students to kind of dive a little bit deeper and use AI. So they could ask AI intentional questions to evaluate the credibility of the source, or use AI tools to determine the credibility and figure out which is the dupe, which is not. So this is a neat idea that might be interesting for you to try in your classroom. Our third scenario here, we join Miss D's 9th grade algebra class, where they're getting ready to study a unit on slope. So this is our math scenario. And in this scenario here, Miss D knows that drawing on students' background knowledge and experiences can be an effective way to make the content more accessible. So Miss D uses ChatGPT to generate real life experience or examples of slope that will connect to her students' interest to kick off the unit. She'll create a variety of leveled tasks using that include applications of slope in relatable real life scenarios and produce work solutions to the task. So these are just some different ways that she could use this for this lesson. We kind of formulated the delivery of the lesson in a 3-step before, during, and after. So you can see, before this lesson is presented to the students, Miss D might post an instructional video in her LMS course for students to watch before class. So she would introduce the concept of slope in real world examples such as skateboarding. During the lesson on the first day, Miss D would launch thinking tasks for students to complete in groups around the room using vertical whiteboard spaces. We kind of incorporated some building thinking classrooms into this, if you're familiar. She might ask questions or invite discussion or provide hints for students to solve some of these problems. And then afterward, Ms. D would post worked solutions to the tasks in her LMS course for students to access and review again after class. So there's kind of like a 3-step process. You could see this entire lesson design being brought out. So this entire lesson would be done. The last example here we have is a little more generic than the other 3, because we thought that, especially if you're an elementary teacher on this webinar, all the way through, high school or higher ed, oftentimes you see this across K to 12. The background for this lesson, so Mr. P wants to create a project choice board for his students to show what they know at the end of a unit or module. Mr. P knows when students are given choice and how to demonstrate their understanding. It increases student engagement, empowerment, and personalizes the experience to meet all his learners' needs. So you can imagine right now, probably many of us have tried to come up with a choice board to give students different ways to show how they learned. In this example here, Mr. P uses ChatGPT to generate different activities for students to demonstrate their learning in multiple ways that are also AI proof. So we want to think about, multiple means of expression and action for students. So ways that maybe they could write or record or maybe construct something physically. And then ChatGPT also designed Mr. P's rubric to assess students across those multiple means of expression. So Mr. P didn't have to worry about creating the choice board or the criteria. Was all of that was done for him. And then finally, in that lesson delivery, Mr. P shares the project choice board digitally with his students via his district's LMS. He explains the project's criteria, and students have time to work on it until the assigned due date. Mr. P students may consider using AI to help better understand the content, support executive functions, and generate ideas for their project. So when we think about this scenario not only personalizes the learning experience for all students, but it gives every student an opportunity to demonstrate what they know at their level and to meet their needs. On the next slide here, we want you to think a lot of these scenarios all of the scenarios had the teachers utilizing AI, but then there were a few that also had the students utilizing AI. And these two sheets here, one of them is a checklist and the other is a rubric, both from the resource Turnitin. And we often use this resource a lot at our high school, but these are AI misuse checklists and rubrics. And the purpose of these is for educators to really know the capabilities and limitations of AI tools and consider these when designing writing prompts. And it's really great. It gives you step-by-step, either a yes or a no, and you can check off whether or not your writing prompt is AI proof. And we want to be able to utilize these tools as educators to generate prompts to make our students become more critical thinkers and to not be prompting the answers right into a bot. Lastly here, so I know we had some conversation and there was a lot of buzz in the chat, but we want to invite, some of our teacher panelists that are on here today and also you to really share how you've used AI in your classroom. So we talked a lot about policy earlier, but maybe like what's a lesson that you've done with your students where either you've used AI to generate the lesson design or your students used AI to help complete or support the lesson or assignment. So we're going to give a few minutes now to our panelists if they want to unmute and start chatting. For those of you that are joining us in the webinar, you can type in the chat.
I can start if that's okay. Just because it was kind of new to us in the beginning, I didn't necessarily use it as a lesson with the kids, but I used it to help plan my own lessons. As a special education teacher, I have to learn content super, super fast, and it's not always content that I teach. So I would help students in science and social studies and math, and I don't know anything about rocks. So I type in ChatGPT, tell me about rock erosion, tell me everything about it. And then I could say, create an assessment about it. Now differentiate it for students on a third grade level with 3 answer choices. So I really like the ability to put stuff in there and then be able to revise it based on what my kids needed. So it took so much of my thinking process that I would spend hours and hours on at home, and it made it faster for me. And then I could deliver a lesson literally the next day by using that. So for me, Sam came to the special ed department actually and told us to think about it as a personal assistant. And when I thought about it that way, I'm like, oh my gosh, my life is changed as a teacher. And as a mom too. There's some good things in there for moms, but it really helped to make my work go faster. And then I could focus on more the things I wanted to focus on and less of the content and differentiation. Now I could focus on creating games for them, but I also used ChatGPT for that too. like create a scavenger hunt on all this information about rocks, align it to all the new science standards, and make it readable for students who can only see pictures. So they could, it created really great things for me. I've used it for professional development. I've used it to give inspiring messages to teachers during PSSAs. Nicole and I worked with Erin Cleary as well to pump up our staff. So we left them little notes, but just writing a note wasn't good enough for me. I had to make it a poem. But I'm not a very good poet. So I said, please give me a haiku about math teachers and how awesome they are and how they're going to get through the PSSAs. And it was awesome what they created. It was pretty long. And I'm like, okay, you need to shorten that to 3 lines. And it did. So it was really cool to see how much it could produce for us just as an assistant, to have somebody else. We're always talking about, oh, if I had 5 of me. This is very exciting for me as an educator. And I'm going into computer lit and business ed next year to teach, and I'm definitely going to be using this to help me come up with more things, especially current things. And that's the exciting part too. I can't stay current on all of these things all the time. It goes so fast, but ChatGPT can help me. And I could say, all right, what are the new social media apps that students are using right now? And it can come up with those things for me. And then I can look in, I don't even have to look into it. I can just ask it, okay, explain what that is. How are students using it? And I'll get all this information so quickly. Now you fact check it and you make sure it's reliable, of course, like that's what we're teaching our students, but we also have to be diligent about that. And I think sharing that with our students is also important. Sharing how we use this technology ourselves personally helps model for the students. If we want students to read, we model how to read. We read in front of them. We want them to use AI, we're going to model AI in front of them and use it not just as a teaching tool, but for ourselves. And I think that makes it relevant for the students. Okay, I'm going to stop talking.
Thanks, Karen. Is there anyone else? I know Meredith and Nicole might be backstage. You might want to jump in and share.
Yeah, I'm here now. I can jump in. So I kind of think of ChatGPT as my creative sidekick when I'm planning my lessons. If I'm stuck or I need a new idea, or I just want to structure activities differently, I'll type in my general topic, or I might type in the ISTE standards. So a lot of what I do, we align ourselves to the ISTE standards. And sometimes the lesson that ChatGPT produces, it may not necessarily be exactly what I want, but it's a great starting point. And I get really inspired by it. And it's nice because I can interact with it. So I could say, can I have a lesson that's more collaborative or more hands-on, or I don't really need that topic. Can we go more in depth about something else? With my 8th grade students, we were covering a psychology unit, and I was putting together a lesson about multiple intelligences. And the information that I was finding was just kind of overwhelming. And I just wanted a simplified explanation, some relatable examples, and ChatGPT was able to give me that really quickly. So I use it as kind of the boost of inspiration that I need sometimes when planning.
And I just want to jump in real fast. Nicole and I worked really well together last year. We collaborated a lot. So I would suggest if you don't have an AI buddy, find one in school, because it was really helpful. I would be like, oh, I'm trying to come up with this. And Nicole would be like, use ChatGPT. I'm like, yes, brilliant. Let's do that. So if you can have somebody to kind of work your ideas off of and use ChatGPT at the same, or any of the AI products, it's much more meaningful and helpful. Definitely drove me further. Okay, now I'm really done.
I think that's it. So first of all, I know that was a lot of information in a relatively small window of time. So thank you for your focus and your participation.